Just recently, there's been a lot of discussion about is the traditional concept in the financial world of advice of a 60-40 portfolio, meaning 60% equity, 40% fixed income, or minor variations thereof, now somehow, some way obsolete. This argument has been fueled partly by comments from BlackRock and partly by comments from Goldman Sachs, the one being more optimistic about the equity future and the other being more pessimistic about the future. And what I would say is that this discussion in many ways was obsolete when I was very young. 60-40 for most people is wrong. It always was. Let me try to take you through that. And bear with me as I just go into some nuances at first that may seem tangential but really aren't. The fact of the matter is that the equity allocation that you should have more than not solely, is driven by what your long-term needs are. And with most people, when you ask them, what do you really need your money to do for you? What are you really trying to accomplish? What's your purpose? The most common answer that you hear over and over again is some minor variation of to take care of me and my spouse the rest of our lives. If the person's single, maybe just take care of me the rest of my life. Those are the answers you hear most commonly, then ameliorated by phrases like, oh, I'd like to leave some money to my children, or before death or after death, I want to leave some money to charity. But the big one is take care of me and my spouse the rest of our lives. The next logical question is, so how long are you going to live? Well, nobody really knows, but if you look at your parents' average age of death and your grandparents' average age of death and compare your personal health and living standards to theirs, you get some clue relative to what your current age is. And mostly people have been living, once they get past the young ages that people die at, up through their 30s, they've been living longer and longer. And so if you're your classic 60-year-old facing retirement 50, 60, 70 years ago, the average person maybe was living 5 to 10 more years, maybe 15. But now the odds are that they're living up into their mid-late 80s, and that probably keeps increasing. So then you say to yourself, when you look at long time periods, what does better, stocks or bonds? And ultimately, if you don't have enough stock in the portfolio, you run the risk of running out of capital when you're old. And being aged and poor is about as brutal a thing as you can possibly do to yourself. Being young and poor isn't such a tough thing. We pretty much all did that when we were very young people, when we were in our 20s. But being aged and poor, that's brutal. And so really what you want to do is sit there and say, well, if I've got a 20-year or a 25-year or a 30-year time horizon, you really want to have a lot more than 60% in equity, because the odds in those time periods of equity doing better than fixed income are overwhelming. Always have been. And in the few instances over those kind of time periods where fixed income did better than equity, fixed income only did that much better. So the reality is, what's the role of fixed income in a portfolio at all? And the answer is, to a large extent, to dampen the volatility in the portfolio. But if you've got 25 or 30 years ahead of you in your life, or you and your spouse's life, second to die, the fact becomes, for the first good number of years, you don't really need to dampen the volatility that much. In my mind, 60-40 was obsolete when it was first conceived and too much associated with just kind of a standard way that the financial services world sold you on things. But if you've got a long time horizon, you need a bigger equity allocation. Now, if you've got a shorter time horizon, that goes the other way around. Let's say, compared to your parents and your grandparents, your health is not good for whatever your circumstances are. And they died in, let's say, 10 years from your age now, so that you probably die maybe even younger than that. The shorter you make that time horizon, the more you want to reduce the equity because you don't need the money to last as long. And the volatility in the short term can actually eat into what you need every year in those last years of your life. So I encourage you to think about how long do you need this money to really last for you? How long is your time horizon ahead? Remember that 20 or 25 or 30 years is a really long time. Over those time periods, equity always does better than fixed income, or in the few instances where it hasn't in rolling period that long, only done a little bit worse. And think about the fact that you probably need a lot more equity than any 60-40 allocation actually suggests for you. Thank you very much for listening to me. Subscribe to the Fisher Investment YouTube channel if you like what you've seen. Click the bell to be notified as soon as we publish new videos.